With our camera, we can focus on a subject, making that person sharp and the background unsharp. We talk about having our subject in focus and the rest out of focus. The whole idea behind focus is that you can create more depth in your shots. After all, we're looking at a 2D flat video. It might not seem like we're shooting it ourselves, but the audience definitely perceives your video as two-dimensional. And that's why we as filmmakers have to create the illusion that our scene is three-dimensional, and focus is one of the ways to do that. Now, having your subject in focus and the background not separates the two layers. The audience will get a more three-dimensional sense as Lorenzo is loose from the backgrounds. Currently, we've got two layers, but we can also add a third one in there by also bringing in a foreground object. We now go from out of focus to focus and back to out of focus. Or we can even capture a gradient and have a middle part in focus. So before, with the rule of thirds and the golden ratio, we've only been working two-dimensional. With the depth of field, we can add an extra dimension to the composition. With the rule of thirds, we're defining where the audience should look at by placing the eyes on the horizontal line. With focus, we can make the subject sharp and thus the audience looks at that point. So combining these two techniques, we can place our focus point on the guidelines and really define where the audience should look at. But also, we're going to avoid having an out-of-focus foreground element to be placed on the thirds. In a shot like this, it feels like we want to draw too much attention to the foreground object, which is a rock. It's out of focus, so this shot feels irritating. That's why we're going to place it next to the vertical guideline and use the foreground to fill in the empty space, but not draw attention to it. Now, in some exceptions, the out-of-focus foreground object can actually be important, like in this example. We have Lorenzo looking to the landscape in the background. The background is in focus as that's my subject. I want to show the landscape to my audience. But at the same time, I also want to show that Lorenzo is looking at this landscape and enjoying this, so he becomes more than just a foreground element. So that is why we can place him more prominent in the shot, on the guidelines on the rule of thirds, or even in the center like in this example. Working with the golden ratio, we can use this spiral to place that on an out of focus shoulder, and where the spiral goes to, we place that on the character's eye, which we have in focus. This is a typical over shoulder shot. But we can also work with a tree branch or other elements as a foreground object and align it to the rule of thirds or the golden ratio. The great thing about foreground elements is that it's often easy to add, and it doesn't always have to make sense because it's blurred out, so it doesn't draw attention, and so you can't really see what it is. Backgrounds are often a little more tricky, but you need to ask yourself, how important is my background? Is it distracting? Then make it out of focus. Is it important or interesting? Then don't put it out of focus and create depth using other techniques. So to recap, out of focus elements are usually a way to create depth and add a fill to the empty space. And that's why we are aligning them to the composition rules so that they not draw too much attention, unless there's an exception like we've seen before. And this is how the depth of field plays an important role when making a composition. In the next lesson, we're going to work with colors and exposures to help make a more interesting composition. Thanks for watching.